is Dr. Wright. This is part of the Lung Pathology in Easy Bites series. This specific section involves discussion of granulomatous inflammation of the lung, and this session addresses granulomata which are vessel associated. Therefore, the learning objectives are to develop a differential diagnosis based on vessel-associated granulomata and see examples of these entities. When one finds granulomata involving the vessels, you have to consider the following. It could be a primary vasculitis, specifically Wegener's granulomatosis or Churg-Strauss granulomatosis. You have to consider other entities, intravenous talcosis, malignancy associated, infection associated, and sarcoid. So not all granulomata involving the vessels are due to a primary vasculitis. Let me illustrate this. This is relatively uncommon, but secondary vasculitis itself is quite common. You see secondary vasculitis in the midst of an usual pneumonic type process. In this case, it's tuberculous associated, where the vessel is markedly distorted and almost destroyed by the presence of this necrotizing granuloma. This is a case of intravenous talcosis. You can see these poorly formed granulomata, often just single or groups of multinucleated giant cells. And in this Movat stain, here is the elastica of the vessel with the foreign material and foreign body granulomatous reaction to that material. You've seen this slide before. This is sarcoid-associated granulomatous vasculitis, if you will, where the vessel itself is surrounded and distorted by the presence of granulomata. Primary vasculitis, consider two entities, granulomatosis with polyangiitis, which is formerly called Wegener's granulomatosis, and these are the pathological features you require to make a diagnosis of GPA, granulomatous polyangiitis. You need a vasculitis. The vasculitis can involve the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. You need parenchymal necrosis, which can be either a microabscess, so it can be inconspicuous, or it can be rather massive, as found in geographic necrosis. And finally, you need a mixed inflammatory infiltrate, which contains poorly formed granulomata, giant cells, and often palisaded histiocytes. Not all of them are necessary, just some of them. This is an example of granulomatous polyangiitis, and in this case, there is the so-called geographic necrosis, which can be found in GPA. This higher magnification shows the presence of a vasculitis where the vessel itself, you can just see the edge here, has been almost completely destroyed by this granulomatous type of vasculitis, or a palisade reaction in some areas with individual and groups of multinucleated giant cells. This elastica shows the destruction of the elastic, indicating the destruction of the airway wall. GPA is a very destructive vasculitis. This isn't quite true in another primary vasculitis, which is associated with granulomata, and that's Churg-Strauss vasculitis, properly known as eosinophilic granulomatosis with polyangiitis, or EGPA. To make this diagnosis, you obviously need a vasculitis, which can again involve the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. There tend to be extravascular granulomata rather than granulomata destroying the vessel, and these are often called allergic granulomata. There may be associated eosinophilic pneumonia, and there may be an associated asthmatic bronchiolitis. These are some examples of EGPA. Here is a vessel with a very pronounced eosinophilic infiltrate. Here is a vessel with an adjacent poorly formed granuloma. And here's an example of eosinophilic pneumonia adjacent to a vessel. So the learning points here were to formulate a differential diagnosis when the granulomatous inflammation is primarily involving the vessels. Here are your questions. Question number 1. The answer to question number 1. Question number 2. The answer to question number 2. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this session on granulomatous inflammation involving the vessels. As always, your comments are gratefully accepted.